In 1924, an expedition of 12 British men, aided by an army of local help, attempted to reach the summit of Mount Everest. The initial approach on the 1st of June was made by George Mallory and Charles Bruce, but had to be cut short when their team of porters refused to climb any higher. The second approach, made the next day by Edward Norton and T. Howard Somerville, got within 300 metres, less than 1,000 feet of the summit, before they too were forced back due to health concerns and hard terrain. The third and final attempt was made on the 8th of June by Andrew Irvine and once again by George Mallory. They spent the days leading up to the attempt reaching a camp close to the summit established by a previous party. On the morning of the 8th of June they departed, climbed into the clouds, and were never seen again. It would take 75 years for George Mallory's remains to be discovered, and a full 100 for Andrew Irvine's to be found. Whether or not they reached the summit is unknown. Hey everyone, it's a great time to climb, especially in video games. Last year we had Peak soaring to the top of the Steam charts, Bennett Foddy's inevitable follow-up to Getting Over It, Baby Steps released, and as I was working on this video, New Heights finally exited early access and hit version 1.0. Even Expedition 33 got in on the only up trend with some of its side content. I don't really know why climbing simulators have suddenly leaped back into the spotlight. I guess some developers are looking for an escape from this bastard of an Earth that is currently crashing down around the lot of us, and until this period of instability eventually settles, it seems game players looking for relief are willing to join them on the journey too. Which brings me to Cairn, a climbing simulator developed by the game bakers in which you play as Ava, an experienced mountaineer aiming to summit the one unconquered peak left in the world, Kami. I don't know why it grabbed me when all those other examples didn't. Actually, that's a lie, I do know. I'm just not a multiplayer guy, so Peak was already off the table. Baby Steps seemed a little too mean-spirited in its message. New Heights is too focused on simulating the mechanics of climbing rather than the experience from what I've seen of it. And while the climbing minigames in Expedition 33 were a fun distraction, it's not really the reason you play that game, unless you're a horny goblin, which I am. But Cairn was able to offer me something none of those other games could, a mirror, which is very rude, I must say. I do not wish to be perceived. I went in expecting a fun little climbing survival game about the indomitable human spirit, and what I got instead was a conversation. So let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, this video marks the end of 3 full years of monthly uploads, which is pretty incredible. Thank you so much for your support over the years. Here's to another, hopefully. Also, there are going to be spoilers throughout, so this is your only warning. Finally, this video and everything I make for the channel is only made possible by the generous support of people on Patreon, so if you like what I do and want to see more, please consider donating. If you can't support monthly, Ko-Fi is also an option, and if financial support isn't possible, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video around because YouTube sure won't. Some of those other monthly uploads definitely deserve a little extra love too, so if you enjoy this ramble, why not consider checking them out? Alright, let's get to it. This is Cairn.
All I ever wanted was to touch eternity for an instant. To reach one of those rare moments of bliss, where everything seems in its place and you feel you're part of a whole. Do you know what I mean?
Cairn was introduced to the world at Gamescom 2024 with an eye-roller of a pitch from the game bakers. They wanted it to be the Dark Souls of climbing games, and yeah, okay, sure. I had the Dark Souls of pizzas for dinner last night, you're not special. Meaningless as that comparison seems at surface level given the current oversaturation of Souls-likes, it does conjure up certain ideas and expectations. A kingdom in decay, brutal difficulty, epic boss fights against towering foes, a tale of burning ambition that eventually consumes itself, little tragedies that must be sought out at the player's discretion, complete basket cases who say the most morbid out-of-pocket shit only to hit you with the classic, Ha 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 ha. And strange as it is to say, I did find all of those things in Cairn. Kami isn't merely a mountain to be conquered, but that's how Ava approaches it. She's not interested in the layers of history hidden in the rock, or the hundreds of others who attempted the climb before her, or even the corporate sponsors financing her own expedition. The journey doesn't matter to her, only the destination. Her interest in the stone itself only extends so far as where to find her next handhold. Cairn could have opened on her approach to Kami, framed the game as a conflict between the indomitable human spirit and the immovable disinterest of the wilderness, but instead it chooses to begin with Ava alone with her thoughts. Kami might still be Cairn's main mechanical antagonist, but the real enemy Ava faces throughout the game is herself, and her resistless passion to be the first person to reach the top of the world's tallest mountain. I think that's what hooked me ultimately. Ava isn't a blank slate onto which the player can project themselves, but a character in her own right. One I just happen to see a lot of myself in. Ava enjoys her solitude. She can be abrasive. She's full of rage that comes bursting out whenever she suffers a fall or an interruption. She can't get out of her own head, and I have been all of these things too. It takes a while for her more toxic traits to creep out though. There's just too much excitement at the game's beginning for her to be weighed down by doubt or worry. At worst, she's distant with her partner Naomi and her manager Chris, but the second she finds herself joined on the climb by an amateur mountaineer called Marco, they bubble up to the surface in some really ugly ways.
Hey, wait for me! Whew. Whew. It's been days since I've seen anyone. I'm Marco. Nice to meet you. Wait a minute. You're Ava, right? I mean the Ava? Who reached the summit of the Giant's Needle from the south face last winter?
North face.
Her first words to Marco aren't a greeting, but a correction. She's not engaging in the conversation, she's tolerating it, which isn't too different to how she treats the messages from Chris and Naomi that she never returns throughout the game. But while it's easy to join her in laughing off her manager begging for an update,
Send me some news!
Send me some news!
it's a lot harder to ignore how stony she is to Marco here, face to face with another human being. I understand though, I get just as annoyed whenever I run into people while bushwalking, and none of them even try to talk to me. And it's not just that Marco's infringing on her solitude, it's the fact he's everything Ava isn't as a climber. Ava is a seasoned professional. She's been doing this for decades. She's burning with ambition and confidence. She understands the risks of climbing Kami and has come prepared to meet them head on. She doesn't take a single step in Cairn where she's not convinced that in a few days she'll be standing on the summit. Marco is gunning for the summit too, but he's not determined to do it alone. He's happy for the company, possibly because he's a lot less confident in himself. He knows at some point the mountain will prove too much for him, and he's content in the knowledge that when it comes, he can just turn around and go home, something Ava simply can't comprehend.
Well, it's a bit strange to embark on this kind of climb, thinking that you're gonna fail, isn't it?
I'm not fooling anyone. There's no way I'll make it all the way to the summit. I'll come down before the end, just like everyone else.
Why go up then? If you're doubting you can make the climb, that means that your mind's already been defeated, so... yeah, I think you should go back down.
You know what? I'm fine with that.
You climb, you fail, and then?
Then I go back down, set up a cozy spot in my van, and watch a nice TV show on my laptop.
That's it.
I mean, that's all you need, right?
Is it?
Ava and Marco are both on Kami for the love of climbing, but he's here for the journey rather than the destination, and it's in that divide that their friendship ends up strained across the game. Marco does ultimately decide to keep on climbing, and while they mostly make the ascent separately, Ava does open up to him over time. She gives him the motivation to keep going, to aim for the summit, to push past his own limits.
Are you getting tired?
Getting tired. I'm way past that. I'm burnt out.
There's always a time in the climb when you're plagued by doubt. But as soon as you get over it, the motivation returns, and you're left filled with rage to get to the top.
I don't know that I've ever felt that rage.
You can do it, Marco.
She even guides him up the next few meters of the mountain the following morning, but it's not enough. She has to push him further, to make him need the summit the way she does. But that's just not how Marco is wired.
I'm not like you.
Marco.
Please, stop trying to motivate me. You're making things worse. You're getting me to believe I have a chance of succeeding.
Marco, no one ever said it would be easy. So you're gonna get up, pick up your stuff, and we'll continue this climb together.
No. This mountain isn't going to kill me. You are.
The look on her face says it all. He cut right to the bone, and does so again moments later when she offers to accompany him back down the mountain to make sure he does so safely.
Oh, you'd give up on the summit? For me? Is that really what you're saying? You'd go back down and live with that failure? You'd do that, Ava?
She can't answer. In the morning, Marco is gone. Yet another person pushed away, unintentionally or not. But if this is how hard Ava is willing to push a friend, imagine how much harder she must be on herself. The thing is, Marco gets it. Ava just can't see it. One night while they're sharing a bit of mountain moonshine Marco found in a cave, he says,
Can people who don't climb really understand it? Are they able to feel even a tenth of what it's like to be on the wall?
So it's not the lack of willpower to reach the summit that ultimately drives them apart, it's the fact Marco understands why he's climbing, while Ava doesn't. There was a lot of risk in characterizing Ava this way, if only because it's a high-wire tightrope walk to pull off. A little more acid and she'd have come off as a selfish bully. A little less and the central conflict falls apart. Having a player character defy their usual role as neutral avatar to potentially create a conflict of interest with the person pressing the buttons, especially when that character is a queer woman of colour, the free most extreme political stances you can have, because we live in hell, means putting a lot of trust in the player to meet the story halfway. It would have been much easier to make a game where you just climb to the top of a mountain, but that's not what the developers wanted to do. That game already exists, and it's called Getting Over It with a Bennett Foddy. I made a little video about that game a couple of years ago, mostly for myself, because I was in need of catharsis, and that's exactly what I got. I don't often go back to my older videos, but I stand by it. I still agree with my interpretation of the game overall, with one exception. I no longer think Getting Over It was made with love. I think it was made with caustic spite, that the sort of person Foddy was looking to hurt with Getting Over It is anyone foolish enough to try playing it in the first place. All it took was a look at a few interviews in the lead up to Baby Steps' release, to hear how it doubled down on some of Getting Over Its more acidic ideas, to realise, oh, I was finding meaning in this that the author did not intend. And the reason I did is because that game still does capture the experience of mountain climbing, the effort, the frustration, the urge to reach the top, to keep going, to see the summit as merely a stepping stone to something even greater, like you could reach up into the stars and keep on climbing. But it lacks the nuance to properly examine the question of why you would. Bennett Foddy would hate someone like Ava. Getting Over It is a joke made at the expense of people like her, a condemnation of one's urge to climb, but Cairn isn't. Cairn also understands the inherent dangers of mountain climbing, but at no point does the game ever call the player out for wanting to, like Ava, touch eternity, nor is Cairn interested in laughing at the player's frustrations. The developers understand there is more complexity to mountain climbing than merely reaching the summit, even if Ava herself doesn't. It's why I think you're meant to clash with her on certain things, as much as you're meant to sympathise with her too. It can be frustrating to watch her lose her temper and strike the mountain, or scavenge items from corpses as though they intentionally died for her benefit, or leave Naomi on red when she's looking for her partner in a moment of grief, more so than any fall could ever hope to be, because it's a reflection of what humanity can be at our worst, something a game merely interested in being about a mountain could never pull off, and that's what elevates Cairn Cairn above so many other climbing simulators I've played. Ava may be her own worst enemy, but she's not villainous, and there is room within her to change. It is, however, dependent on the player. You can, as Ava wants, race for the summit at the expense of all else, but Kami's a big mountain brimming with secrets worth seeking out. There's no set path to the top. Cairn gives you the freedom to plot out Ava's route to the summit, and the freedom to climb yourself into an impossible situation, too. Robert McFarlane wrote in Mountains of the Mind that, quote, "You can't idealize cliffs and rocks out of existence, no matter how hard you try," end quote, and Cairn recreates that axiom in Digital Stone. There are accessibility features to lower the difficulty, such as the ability to upturn the hourglass like in Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, and undo an unexpected fall, but when playing on the Alpinist or free solo difficulties, those safety nets are cut away. Climbing up does not guarantee progress. If you make the wrong call, then you can strand Ava in a crack of rock from which she cannot escape. Like here, when I was trying to climb to the top of a temple about 2/3 of the way up the mountain. I thought I saw an easy way up around the back of the structure, but the handholds were a lie, and once I screwed a piton into the rock, I found myself trapped by my own progress. Climbing down wasn't an option with the stone having eaten through Ava's fingers and stamina, but climbing up was nigh impossible too. There was no triumph when I finally got to the top, just a lot of frustration that snowballed into rage when I tried to rappel down the easy way and ended up sucked out of bounds into the rock of the temple's roof. Well, this is awkward. I could have reloaded my save, and I honestly should have, because all I'd done since then was climb up to the top of the temple and then get trapped on the way down. But in a weird way, that felt like a cop-out. Cairn records your progress up and down the mountain. Every handhold, every fall, every off-belay, every leap of faith. And after all the effort I'd put in to reach the top of this stupid little temple, I didn't want it struck from the record. So I had Ava take a swig from a bottle of mountain booze and got to work digging her out. It took a little time and a lot of jank, but I did eventually free her from the stone. This whole series of mistakes was completely unintentional on Cairn's part, but it became such a striking moment of the climb, especially since it puts Ava's comment of,
I was born on this mountain,
in a later conversation with Marco, in a whole new light. It's the sort of story you might hear from a real mountaineer who got trapped in a sticky situation and lived to tell the tale, and this despite the fact the game doesn't feature falling rocks or loose terrain in any official capacity. This isn't a bug, it's a feature, and had I raced for the summit, it never would have happened. For some more developer-intended tangents, take Kami's Free Guardians, a series of massive statues built by the mountain's indigenous inhabitants. The troglodytes left in the mountain years ago as the modern world grew up around its base, but their villages and temples remain, and these are by far their most impressive. Each contain hidden shrines that offer the player extra equipment, but the real joy comes from reaching them. The first, close to the base of the mountain, stands like a titan amidst the rock. You have to climb up its legs and across its body if you want to reach the shrine behind its eyes. The second is hidden beneath an overhang of rock that forces you to rappel down into a narrow fissure between two sections of the mountain while the wind hurls you back and forth on the rope, and the third is located as close to the summit as the troglodytes were able to put it, surrounded by frozen waterfalls at the back of a cave cracked open by the ice. It may be the least impressive. Even Ava notes how the troglodytes probably had trouble building the thing so high up the mountain, but within the shrine you'll find a miniature model of Kami, a visual reminder of how far you've come. It's the only one that doesn't make you work for the reward. The first throws you into a long narrow passage with walls too hard for Ava's pitons to penetrate. You have to make the climb on the merit of your skills alone, and it was terrifying. I hate heights in real life, but weirdly Cairn was never able to give me vertigo, except in this cave. I took things slow, measured every movement, slid back a few inches if Ava ever started to struggle, and it was exhilarating. I loved it so much. The shrine at the end simply couldn't compete with the experience of reaching it. Ironically, the opposite was true of the second Guardian. The shrine within the statue, called the Palace of Winds, is filled with old petrified trees covered with little notes left behind by the troglodytes expressing their regrets, or their hopes and and dreams. Ava even wonders what message she'd leave, and while I can't speak for her, I can for myself. Fuck this place. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but the climb out is an absolute bastard. I was bubbling with that rage Ava mentioned to Marco the whole way up, because I just kept falling back down at a certain point. It was maddening, in a very authentic way too. I've never fallen off a mountain before, and hopefully never will, but I do understand the fury that rears up whenever gravity conspires to pull you back down to Earth. The angriest I've ever been was the split second between the moment a board on the back porch snapped off beneath my boot heel, and the next second when I slammed down face first on the rest of the decking with my left leg sticking through the hole. I was so mad I didn't even notice the fall had opened the front of my left leg down to the bone when it struck the jagged edge of the snapped board until I climbed back out and noticed the itch of spilled blood running down my somehow unbroken pant leg, and when the rush of anger retreated I was left in such a state of shock that even after seeing my own shin bone staring out at me in a vicious bloody grin through an inch-wide hole in my leg, I actually phoned the nearest hospital to ask, "Hey, should I call an ambulance?" And the guy on the other end was just like, "Yeah, probably." What an awful fucking day. Anyway, Cairn can't truly recreate that level of rage or that level of shock, but it does evoke both by having Ava react to each and every fall, something I've not seen any other climbing simulator protagonist do. In those games, Peak, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, Only Up, Alt F4, Jump King, a difficult game about climbing, hell, even Expedition 33, there's no attempt to characterize the climbers within the context of the climb. It's only ever the player who can react to a missed jump or a munched input. Having Ava cry out in terror or frustration every time she slips off the side of the mountain helps sell her as a character, rather than just a suit to be worn by the player during gameplay and the writers during cutscenes. Plus, it helps to have someone with which to share in that frustration, to commiserate the lost progress and then get right back on the job. Her frustration is matched by the worry she expresses whenever on the verge of slipping, or the feral joy when she screws in a piton and off belays after a particularly rough patch of climbing. She's pretty blunt around other people, but she's a lot more talkative on her own. In fact, she's a massive goofball, always making jokes no one but she will ever hear.
I can hear the narrator's voice. Kids, don't try this at home.
And these are aspects of her character you wouldn't really get to see if you beelined straight for the top, nor aspects of her character the developers really needed to include, but I love that they did, same as the exercises she does each morning if you bivouac through the night, or the book she brought up to read before bed that sits eternal in your inventory. Disappointed they didn't write a whole-ass mystery novel for the player to read though. You know what, this game is trash actually. There are still moments where you'll be funneled up a narrow fissure for the sake of the story, but outside of big plot beats, you're free to go up and go down as you please. And I was surprised at how much I did go down, honestly. During the production of this video, I was saddened to hear author Dan Simmons passed away. He wrote a couple of books that I really enjoyed. Song of Kali, in spite of its xenophobia, The Terror, in spite of its homophobia, but one I really didn't like was Abominable. It's a horror novel set on Mount Everest in the 1930s, and from that title you'd think there'd be some Yeti action, but, well, it's complicated. Here's a spoilery review to read at your own leisure. Anyway, among the many things that annoyed me about that book was how much the characters go up and down the mountain like a fucking yo-yo, pinballing between camps again and again and again. But I think at the time I was missing the point. Cairn made me realise that sometimes you have to go down to go up. Progress isn't just a straight line leading to the summit. Sometimes you need to step back and rethink things. And not just because I'd accidentally climbed myself into an impossible situation. Sometimes I just wanted to check out something I saw peeking around a distant corner of the mountain. I wanted to explore this abandoned cable car station as much as I wanted to check out this monument to Kami's dead, and an old camp left behind by a team of bear watchers. At one point I reached a new level of the mountain, looked back down the way I'd come, and saw a tent I'd missed. God damn it. At another another, I noticed a hole in the wall on the other side of the cliff and thought, well, I have to see what's up there. Every so often you can find a map left behind by someone who came before that will give you a better lay of the land, offer up a few different climbing routes, and point you towards some secret or another. But it's up to the player to take Cairn up on the offer, and some places it barely draws attention to at all, like this rave cave where you can pick up some fireworks. If you want to see it all, you will at some point have to rappel down to keep exploring, and I think that makes for a richer experience than if you did nothing but chase the top, especially if you intend to reach it with a full stomach. Normally I'd try to break each aspect of gameplay up into its own chapter of the video, but that's kind of impossible when it comes to Cairn. The survival mechanics facilitate the climbing, which allows for exploration, which net you more supplies, so you can keep the cycle going all the way to the top. The game does throw out a freebie every now and then. There are water sources all over the place, and backpacks and pots to be found at most bottlenecks, so if you want to brute force your way up to the top, you probably can, but it'll be close. I feel as though I was quite thorough, and I still found myself low on food more often than I would have liked. I've made it no secret across the years that I generally don't enjoy survival systems in games, like with weapon durability and time restraints. They're a pretty good indicator that I'm going to have a bad time, but Cairn is the rare exception where I think the survival mechanics added to the experience, partly because they never overwhelmed it. There are 4 things you need to manage in Cairn: hunger, thirst, temperature, and Ava's fingers. There's no penalty to having low hunger, thirst, or temperature as far as I'm aware, but Ava will perish if any one of them empties completely. I found thirst the easiest to manage because there's water everywhere, and lots of things to carry it in too. Ava starts off with a flask that can hold 4 portions, but by the end of the game her bag was overflowing with bottles and thermoses and a second, even larger flask, to the point I had little room for anything else. And they don't necessarily have to carry water. You can mix drinks and soups together for an extra kick while resting in Ava's tent. The game even gives you the option to quench Ava's thirst straight from the spring if you don't want to waste anything in your pack. I never found myself in a state of dehydration, at least beyond the mandate of the plot. That mountain moonshine Marco found on his climb has a hell of a kick to it. I came a lot closer to starving Ava to death. All the bars deplete just a little faster than you'd like, but the hunger meter drops like a rock when you're not looking. I'd be in the middle of a climb, and suddenly Ava's stomach would start growling at me like, fuck off. At least let me reach the next level of the mountain. There's a lot of stuff to eat on Kami, but very little of it is worth scoffing down without a bit of extra prep. A chocolate bar will fill Ava up on its own, but mountain plants won't, and nor will freeze-dried peas or uncooked rice. The game still will let you eat them, which is fun, but it's not a smart play. It's only worth it if you're desperate, and there were some times where I did find myself snacking on uncooked food just to bump the hunger bar back out of the red. Temperature sits a little between the two. It's dependent on how high up the mountain you are, and what sort of weather's lashing the peaks. Rain and snow will sap Ava's body heat, but if you're close to the base and standing in the sun, or hiding in a cave, then it'll settle over time. Bivouacking at a save point or wrapping Ava beneath a heavy blanket will warm her back up, and there are items that'll get the job done without being forced to let Ava's thirst or hunger bars run down. But the way you deal with temperature is the same way you deal with all her other needs: cooking. You can make just about anything in Ava's portable stove, and Cairn encourages you to try. Ava doesn't recommend mixing coffee and alcohol, but the game won't stop you from doing it. Sometimes you'll get a dud. Like, I'm still mad mixing booze and soup it doesn't make ramen. What the fuck do you mean it makes a drink instead? But other times you'll get a surprisingly hearty meal. A few ground up thistles and some boiled water was enough to keep Ava going in the early game, but what you really want to look out for are the recipes. They're hidden all over the mountain, and usually demand very specific ingredients, but the benefits are worth it. Mixing maple syrup and sugar water will get you maple fudge. Throwing goat milk and a fish into the pot will cook up cave-style trout. These rare dishes offer bonuses far beyond what the common meals can, like periods of extra grip, extra lung capacity, extra speed. They can turn off hunger, thirst, and temperature, and even health for a few precious minutes. These bonus stats stack too, so if you've got the ingredients or the right assortment of stimulants, You can have Ava scrambling up the mountain like she's snorting a line 1 mile high. Wait, what do you mean I can lick the frog? Oh no. One thing cooking always does is warm you up, and most dishes will stay hot for 24 real-time minutes, so it's always worth busting out the stove to check what you've got on you, even if Ava's working with a full stomach. Drinks and soups stored in thermoses will stay warm indefinitely, so there's no reason not to reheat them either, even if you've got nothing else to add to the mix. There's a lot of room for experimentation, and I was always eager to see what I could throw together whenever I did stop. I was less eager to check Ava's fingers. Free climbing is hell on the hands, and Cairn isn't shy about showing off the consequences. Those cuts look fucking painful, which I suppose is why Cairn often gets compared to Death Stranding, though Ava never has to rip out a loose toenail, and thank God for that, but she does need to keep her fingers wrapped for maximal grip. I'm pretty sure climbing on unstable surfaces will result in faster cuts and scrapes, but I don't know for certain because it was an aspect of the survival mechanics that I was mostly able to stay on top of. I think there was only one time in the entire run where Ava's grip dropped below good. I never found myself running low on extra rolls of tape either. The mountain provides so long as you're willing to look. There's something very satisfying about the mechanic of wrapping the cuts, too. It's almost ritualistic the way you have to spin the analog stick. I don't know how they managed to get it working without a metric ton of awkward clipping. Food, drink, and medicines aren't the only things you can find on the climb, though. There are some items that just exist to serve the fiction, like Ava's broken camera, or the coins you can find in the gym at the beginning of the game. I kept them both for so long because I expected at some point I'd run into another working vending machine, or find a way to repair the camera, even if Ava has no intention of snapping any pics for Chris and everyone else waiting back home, but I never did. I ended up recycling them into chalk to enhance Ava's grip. The fireworks too serve no mechanical purpose. They're just something to set off when you conquer another section of the climb. I hung on to them my whole playthrough intending to set them off at the summit, but that never happened. They just spent the whole ascent wasting space in Ava's backpack. You can find a lot of upgrades across Kami if you explore thoroughly too. A doll that can banish storms, don't think about it too hard, glowing gloves to see better in the dark, a pinwheel to tell you which way the wind is blowing without having to consult your weather monitor, but you will never find a larger backpack. This is all you've got to work with, and it fills up fast. Inventory management is the whole reason I ended up with so little food by the end of the game, because packets and tins take up so much space. You can shake the bag to rearrange the items and maybe you'll free up enough room to grab an extra thistle, but sooner or later you'll reach the limit. You can make room manually by recycling garbage and unwanted items with the press of a button though. You could even recycle the broken pitons if you're insane, but they're better off restored while you're bivouacking. It's a delicate balancing act of survival bars, inventory management, and supply levels, but it never felt weighted against the player. It was just the right amount of intrusion to keep things tense without crossing a line into outright cruelty. And the same goes for the climbing, which is very intuitive. Ava is a bit like Octodad, only you control her one limb at a time rather than all at once. The goal is to wedge her hands and feet into cracks or atop ledges to provide proper grip, and the game does not hold your hand in figuring out where a good spot might be. The most it'll do to help you along is choose what it thinks is the most appropriate limb to make the next move, but it was a little wonky in my experience. Sometimes I wanted to stretch across a gap to grab an outcropping, or slide a leg into position to make a lunge, and Cairn's head would suddenly be filled with rocks thinking, you want to control the one limb you can't move, right? Thankfully you can override its decisions with another press of a button for manual control, though I only had to do it once or twice. Still, it can be hard to tell what it considers solid rock and what it considers a falling hazard. There were times when I had Ava's feet planted firmly on a ledge, and her hands gripping the next shelf up, and the screen would still start scrolling in, turning monochrome as her stamina ran low, and she fussed over an incoming fall. One time it kept turning her back to the wall while I was trying to shuffle around a bastard of a corner, which did not end well. There were other instances where it just didn't register that I'd reached a ledge, and so Ava sort of flopped around pouring for purchase, though to be completely honest, if I were in her place, I'd probably be doing the same. There are also times when proper placement simply isn't possible, which leaves you with three options. Climb back down to find another route, scuttle across the bare rock and hope you reach solid ground before Ava's stamina gives out, or lunge for it. If you've got one leg bent at the knee, you can reach up or over to grab a ledge that would otherwise be beyond Ava's grasp. It's the same when you're climbing up a wall of ice with a pair of axes, though, if anything, that's slightly easier. It's still best to find purchase in cracks and divots, but you can force hand and footholds into the ice by holding the button down if you want. Weather plays a big part in how you climb too. Under clear blue skies, you can swoosh right up a rock face in no time, but at night you need to consider a light source. When it's raining or storming, water runs down the mountain in sheets, turning the cracks and chips you use for handholds into raging rivers that make it harder to find purchase on the already precarious rock face. Sometimes the wind will try to whip you right off the side of the mountain. You have to lie flat against the stone and keep still until it passes. And all of it costs time. Time that eats away at Ava's hunger and thirst and temperature, to say nothing of her poor fingers. If you need a break, you can always screw in a piton and off belay, which will restore Ava's stamina, but it's not a certain thing. You need to perform a QuickTime event to attach the piton correctly, and even if you pull it off, Ava's grip might fail before she can clip it to the carabiner on her belt. This doesn't dislodge the piton. You can still climb back up to it, which is a nice touch, but it doesn't lessen the frustration that comes with a fall. Though, I found myself equally as frustrated when Cairn ignored the lost progress of a fall too. At one early point, I suffered a particularly nasty drop, but it wasn't enough to kill Ava. She fell a few dozen meters, but somehow she was able to walk it off. I expected that I'd have to climb back up to remake all that lost progress, but then the game hit me with a circle wipe and sent me back up to where I'd fallen, and I found this just as annoying as the fall itself, which is weird to say given in any other climbing game without that sort of soft checkpoint system, I'd be complaining about its absence. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, but there it is. Cairn didn't count it as a rewind either. It wasn't present in my stats at the end of the game, so this just happens on the normal alpinist difficulty. And I've been wondering why ever since it happened, given Cairn presents itself as a hardcore climbing simulator. A game like Dark Souls would never offer such explicit help to the player. You'd be expected to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, down a few painkillers, and keep on climbing, but Cairn apparently isn't interested in that style of brutal difficulty. It's a challenging game, but it's never cruel, and that's where I think this unexpected circle wipe comes from. Cairn wants you to fall, but never too far. It wants that motivational rage Ava spoke of to Marco to churn in the player's belly, but there's a certain point where that anger will bubble over and turn you away from the game, possibly for good. Plus, a longer fall in Cairn means more than it might in a difficult game about climbing, given the survival systems hanging over the player's head like the sword of Damocles. Now that I think about it, it's possible this was implemented to prevent a soft lock, but still, it was jarring in the moment. Even then, the difficulty as is has been enough to turn some people away. Kenneth Shepard wrote a whole article for Kotaku about how Cairn just isn't for him. Quote, "Movement is clunky in Cairn, and movement is what you do in this game. Even when Ava is standing on solid ground, the weight of her climbing gear makes her sluggish to pilot, so simply stepping along a flat surface requires the same kind of measured attention as deciding which chip in the stone to reach for next. You're not really meant to run up to the side of a cliff and just start crawling up the side of it. Every path you endeavour to climb must be meticulously planned, often from below, and I can imagine how that kind of slow, thoughtful movement could click for someone more patient than I, but Cairn's dedication to emulating the full body workout of rock climbing can't get out of its own way." End quote. I can't fault these criticisms. Ava is indeed pretty slow when she's walking around, unless you're willing to chip away at her health to speed her up to a brisk walk or a short jog before a jump, and his comments that her limbs get tangled up or hidden behind her torso aren't unreasonable. I often found Climbot sitting right where I wanted wanted to move next, and had to wait for it to scuttle away before making the lunge. But at the same time, that's kind of the point. As I've been saying this whole video, Cairn wants you to stop and take in the mountain, to enjoy the journey in spite of Ava's goals. That's probably why her normal walking speed sits right on the edge of annoying. Any faster and you'd miss all the supplies and secrets hidden in out-of-the-way places, on corpses or in caves or other climb bots left to rust among the stones. I don't disagree with Shepard's comments, but I don't see them as negatives. They're the whole reason Cairn was able to move me to tears by its final moments. Consider a different fall, also made earlier in the game. I'd just reached the base of Kami after completing the warm-up over on Tenzin, and I was ready to climb. So, naturally, I whiffed one of the first jumps of the main mountain. There's an irony to have Ava be described as a seasoned climber, only to put her in the hands of a complete novice, even if it does serve the fiction that Kami is a killer. But that was something I only came to realise in hindsight. In the moment, I felt that same frustration Shepard talks about in his article, but then on the very last stumble, I tumbled down into a fissure and discovered a cave leading into the mountain. I knew it was somewhere in the area because I'd found a map mentioning it back in the gym as a reward for completing all the tutorial climbs, but it gave no indication of where to look, and I never would have found it if I hadn't literally fallen right into its mouth. The discovery scattered the frustration to the wind, and from that moment I was caught in Cairn's spell, entirely because of everything Shepard couldn't stand. It's not even a matter of patience, because I'm not a patient man. It's that Cairn let me play at my own pace in every aspect of the gameplay, and when I did inevitably fall, there was usually something fun to find nearby that would bring my spirits right back up. Or not, as the case may be. Even before you reach the opening titles, you can find numerous missing persons posters remembering those who attempted the climb before you and were never heard from again. Ava's own attempt is a big event, big enough to be front page news, and even the press assumes she's already lost. If Cairn was a different sort of game, these missing persons would be treated as a collectible, like finding all the name tags in a research facility after some sort of disaster. And when I first started out, I figured eventually I'd get some sort of closure for these missing persons, but you never do. If their remains are on the mountain to be found, it's never made explicit to the player. Most of those you find are nothing more than rotting clothes draped across sun-bleached bone, or else survived by a rusty climbot on the verge of shutdown, still fighting to complete their last objective. One particularly striking group of bodies comes close to the summit as you climb this icy spire. 3 mountaineers roped together, dead in an instant when one of them was knocked from the rock, yet to reach their final resting place by the stubbornness of the piton anchoring them to the cliff. It didn't affect me as much as this moment though, when you stumble across an old climbot still receiving messages from its owner's son. The father is long dead, but as the son says,
As long as your climbot still gets my messages, I like to believe you get them too. There's just so much I wish I could have told you. Half of them I didn't even know then. Now I know. I would have liked to tell you that I love you and to say thank you for everything. I miss you.
I'm not moved to tears very often, because I'm a fundamentally broken human being, but that had me bawling my fucking eyes out. It made me want to grab my phone and say all the same things to my own parents while I still have the chance. But I couldn't. Because I'm a fundamentally broken human being, who uses humour as a coping mechanism. I'm sad now. Ava can't either, despite her also understanding the implication of the moment. She could send a message back to Naomi or Chris, but she doesn't. She lets the moment pass and keeps on climbing, because disappearing into the clouds is ultimately easier than turning around to face the people watching you climb. Another body you find very early on belongs to Gabriel, a climber who hurt his leg, and whose partner Roberto left him behind to find a type of Edelweiss native to Kami, said to have healing properties. Roberto never returned from his mission. Gabriel's bones are proof of that. But you can still follow his journey up the mountain in search of the flower, and eventually you do catch up to him, tucked away in the spire right beside the trio of hanging bodies, having found the Edelweiss at last. And for what? He blames himself for not listening to Gabriel when he asked to leave the mountain while they were still able, writing, quote, "Maybe if I myself ate the flower, it would give me enough strength to reach the damn summit. But what's the point, really? Kami got the better of you, and she got the better of me. What were we really hoping for? Wait a little longer. I'm on my way." End quote. Like Ava, Roberto and Gabriel came to Kami looking to be the first to reach the summit, but unlike her, they had nothing to lose in the attempt. They grew up as orphans and saw the mountain as their ticket to better things. They had nowhere to go but up, and yet they still lost everything. The Bear Watchers didn't make it that far. You find their camps early on, and from what they left behind, it's clear they had no intention of reaching the summit. Their purpose on Kami was to study the local bears, and their subjects found them long before they reached the mountain's highest peaks. At first you stumble across photographs of scratch marks in the rock and distant sightings, but it soon turns into tents torn open by razor-sharp claws, and skeletons dragged away into lonely caves to be consumed at a predator's leisure. These were not bad people, but they did come to Kami with a uniquely human hubris that believes if you're gentle to nature, nature will be gentle to you in return. They got too close, even unintentionally, and paid the price. There's certainly parallels to be made between the doomed Bear Watchers, killed by the very thing they came in search of, and Ava's own single-minded drive to reach the summit, but there's also an echo of Timothy Treadwell and Amy Huguenard. Treadwell was a very troubled man who sought refuge in the Alaskan wilderness, where he lived amongst the wild bears of the region, and was eventually killed by one alongside his girlfriend Huguenard. He's the subject of Werner Herzog's 2005 documentary The Grizzly Man, and I can't imagine someone at the Game Bakers didn't have that film in mind when working on Cairn, especially this little slice of it. In the film, Herzog says,
"I believe the common denominator of the universe is not harmony, but chaos, hostility, and murder. And what haunts me is that in all the faces of all the bears that Treadwell ever filmed, I discover no kinship, no understanding, no mercy. I see only the overwhelming indifference of nature."
And that's the truth hiding beneath the surface of Kami's towering peaks. Herzog's referring specifically to Treadwell's obsession with the bears that eventually killed him, but it's also true that it is human beings who give the mountain its meaning, be it as a place to call home, or an escape from the outside world, or an enemy to be defeated, something espoused by Robert McFarlane throughout Mountains of the Mind, too. It's Ava and the player who give Kami her character, but to the animals that call the mountain home, it's just rock, and that includes the bear that killed these people. Follow its trail long enough and the bear will find you, and at the worst possible moment, deep in its den with Ava's back to the wall. Despite how the Game Bakers pitched Cairn as the Dark Souls of climbing games, there's no way to fight off the animal. Ava isn't a warrior, and even if she were, it's a fucking bear. I did try to set off those fireworks to scare it away, but no luck, so I went back to the old adage of, if it's black, fight back, if it's brown, lie down. I had Ava go to sleep, and waited until the bear did the same so I could sneak her out unscathed. Another game might have turned the encounter into some great cinematic boss fight, but in Cairn, it's just an optional meeting, no different from when you run into the others who still call Kami home. The spider is no more a monster than Kami's resident bear, but he might be just as dangerous. He's a prospector, mining the green glowing crystals you can find growing all throughout Kami's caves. He's been at it for years, chipping away at the mountain gem by geode, slowly carving out a space for himself amidst the crystalline glow. You first sense him from afar, hear the echo of his mining down a partially collapsed corridor, and also find this corpse he left behind. The spider wasn't the only troglodyte prospector to mine the mountain for wealth, but he is all that remains of the expedition. The others died at his hand to ensure when the mother lode was found, it was he alone who could claim it. He's not outwardly hostile to Ava when she stumbles onto his operation, but he's not friendly either. Like his namesake, the spider will leave you alone if you don't take what's his. In fact, he'll even offer you an upgrade if you find him 4 choice crystals. A nice bit of kit he probably took off the body of one of his former comrades. If he didn't snatch it off another climber, he apparently also mistook for a crystal cutting competitor, whose corpse you can find in a pit piled pretty low with his other victims. Look, it's a big pit, he'd need to kill a lot more to fill it up, and Cairn isn't that kind of game, but the fact he's murdered 4 people at all in such a grounded title shows how close Ava comes to death while in his part of the mountain. Like her, he's trying to touch eternity, though in a very different way. Fame and fortune will get your name etched into history, even if he won't be able to take the crystals with him when the time comes to reap the blood he's sown within the mountain. Kami is only his home for as long as he needs it to be. Once he's got what he wants, he's out of there. The only problem is he's searching for something that doesn't exist.
Climbing won't make you rich.
He says bluntly to Ava, but neither will wrapping yourself within thousands of meters worth of rock in a fruitless search for perfection, and that cut deeper than I'd like to admit. I saw a lot of myself in Ava all through the game, but I felt Cairn's unspoken criticisms of the spider in my fucking bones, because I too hide away from the world in search of perfection, wondering if the next strike of the rock will be the one to start it rolling downhill. And I'm not just talking about the videos made for this channel, I'm talking about all the creative projects I've ever undertaken, the novels, the games, the animations, completed or not. When you work alone, as I mostly do, it's easy to sit on something until it's perfect, to keep chipping away until it's exactly right, to use that reason as an excuse to keep it hidden from the world, because you're worried about what people will think, or scared that they won't think about it at all. As long as the spider remains on the mountain, then fame and fortune is just one good day away, but as long as the spider remains on the mountain, then that one good day will never come. He will never leave Kami to cash out. He'll just keep defiling graves and making new corpses to fill them until he drops dead into one himself, which is ultimately where we differ, because I have actually come down off the mountain to sell the crystals I've cut, even if when it comes to the novels, no one's fucking buying. Trying to get a foot in the door with literary agents and editors has been like screaming into a wall of rock, be it through unsolicited queries, friends of friends, or by paying festivals for the opportunity to lock myself in a room with one to perform a tight 5 pitch. But without the many ego deaths suffered through that process, I'd never have worked up the nerve to start making videos, much less publish them, where I actually have found a little success. So yeah, fame and fortune would be nice, and I'll flog my shit however and whenever I can. Support links in the description in case you missed it, by the way, but it's not the reason I'm in this game. Compared to the dead silence I've received from the publishing industry, having a few hundred regular viewers show up to hear me ramble about dinosaurs or some random horror game that caught my eye for an hour or two each month is sublime, to say nothing of the people financially supporting me for it. I'm very lucky and I understand that, but it's an experience that the spider will never have, because he can't give up his perfectionism. When I identify with him, it's not in any positive way, as it is with Ava. It's that slimy voice at the back of my mind saying, oh, look, he's wasting his life too. Do you want to end up like him, with years of work and nothing to show for it? Is it really worth finishing this game when you could be doing something productive? Isn't it about time you give up? A voice that's best met with, shut up and fuck off, I've got a mountain to climb. I used to be a perfectionist too, but now I follow the axiom of, fuck it, that'll do. After a certain point in the creative process, you just have to let it go, otherwise it'll never see the light of day. Just because it's published doesn't mean it's carved in stone. You can always go back and change things later, whether we're talking about a book or a movie or a review. Of course, all that is secondary to the spider's actual purpose in holding up a mirror to Ava. She may not have murdered anyone, that we know of at least, but in her pursuit of Kami's summit, she does push people away. She's chasing perfection just the same as the spider, and if she stays on that path, he's a grim prediction of what Ava might become if she can't put it aside. I think it's telling that if you do decide to give up the summit and to go home, one of the images that appears during the credits is Ava and Marco hiding from the spider during their descent. If he is a representation of toxic perfectionism, then for him to see Ava again, in the company of another man who might be after his precious crystals, he'd be left with no choice but to kill them both. No one leaves the mountain until he's got what he wants, until everything is absolutely perfect. The shepherdess is a loner too, but nowhere near as violent. She tends to her mountain goats and keeps to herself, to the point she doesn't even know Kami has been abandoned. The news troubles her enough to invite Ava in for a cup of tea, despite their prickly introduction. She loves to live alone, but was content in the knowledge that the village would always be there for her if she needed. It's a feeling that clearly resonates with Ava, even if she can't express it in words, and with me as well. To lose that safety net of community, even if you mostly exist apart from it, is scary. The idea that it could ever be lost doesn't seem real until it happens. No matter how mentally prepared a person is, the human mind will always struggle with that sort of long-term change. It shakes them both in subtle ways, though not enough to break old habits. As they part ways, Ava finally remembers to introduce herself, and the shepherdess responds with,
"If no one's left to say my name, then it doesn't exist anymore."
essentially admitting to the fact that the person she was is fading away, that she's already becoming a part of the mountain even if her heart's still beating. But Ava doesn't have to fade away too. She still has that safety net of human connection, with Naomi and Chris back home, with Marco and to a lesser extent Climbot on the mountain. The shepherdess isn't broken the way the spider is, but she is resigned to a lonely death, hidden away from the rest of the world, even if you offer her a lifeline from a childhood friend in the form of a letter he left for her when the village was abandoned. The troglodytes may be gone, but they're certainly not forgotten. Their mountain holdfasts and hidden shrines are all over the place. Kami's free guardians are among the most impressive, but I really like the temple about 2/3 of the way up, right before the spire. In it you get the option to set a fire, to declare your intent. 3 fires for if you plan to attempt the summit, 2 for if you're turning back to go down, and 1 for if you've completed the ascent. Once you interact with the wall of the temple, you're not able to back out, so I wasn't able to save Scum and see if their threat to curse anyone who lies about reaching the top of the mountain is true. Instead, I chose to declare my intent to attempt the climb, and to my surprise, the surrounding mountains lit up in support. It's a reminder that Ava isn't as alone as she likes to think she is. Not that she's ever truly alone at all, given Climbot accompanies her all the way up the mountain. It's an older model. Marco says as much, missing many of the modern luxuries that climbers like him take for granted. But Ava can't bring herself to replace it. She hasn't named it like most do either. She only ever refers to it as Climbot, but it's easy to see that she considers it a companion, if not a friend. It's the only one she's ever used. There are unspoken years of history there, and let me tell you, I would die for Climbot too. It's such a little guy, even if it sometimes gets in the way. It takes care of the ropes and pitons for you, recycles garbage into chalk to help with grip, giving it a mechanical rapport with the player on top of its narrative connection to Ava. It is also her only lifeline back to the people she's left behind, the people she's mostly content to ignore until she comes back down. This drives Chris insane, as it would any manager, though eventually he does look past the business end of things to reach out to Ava as a human being, but it has a far more harmful effect on Naomi. When the game begins, she's as excited for the climb as Ava, even calling in to wish her a happy birthday, but as Cairn goes on, she starts to worry. Their cat, Capsule, is sick, Ava's not returning her calls, and eventually it becomes too much for them both.
Why, Ava? I keep asking myself that question. It's just stuck in my head. Why? Why did you leave? Why do you feel the need to climb that big, stupid rock? Why does it affect me so much? Capsule died 2 days ago. He was only 9 years old, can you believe it? He still had a nice life ahead of him. He spent his last night at the vet. You should have seen him in his cage, all skin and bones, drugged up. He could barely walk. But he recognized me, Ava, and he tried to snuggle up to me. When the time came, the vet asked me if I wanted to leave the room. Why would I let him go alone? I stayed, of course. And then, at the end, I held him against me. I told him I loved him. And his body, his little body collapsing into my arms. You can't forget that feeling. love to know, Ava. Why?
Ah! 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 She doesn't get it. She doesn't get any of it.
This is when Ava chooses the mountain over the people she left behind, severing her connection to the outside world for good by way of mutilating Climbot. Naomi reaches out in search of companionship and commiseration in a time of grief, and all Ava can do is scream to the heavens at her temerity for asking the one question she can never answer. It weighs on her though. After getting sloshed on cave booze with Marco, she falls into a dream where Kami is reimagined as a Cuphead boss before the trip turns bad and she's drawn down a goat's throat into a nightmarish recreation of Capsule's final moments. She never speaks of it to Marco, that is Ava's way after all, but you can see the regret hiding behind her eyes, that she wants to reach back out to Naomi, she just doesn't know how, and now she can't, and doesn't that just feel so fucking real? That moment is Ava at her absolute worst, but Marco is almost always there to pull her back from the edge. Without him, and the player, there are so many moments Ava would miss, like their first night together when he wakes her up to watch a late night light show.
How you like that?
See, this is exactly why.
I know.
When all we have is this moment, and everything else in the world disappears.
I know.
But the truth is, she would have missed the moment if not for Marco, like she would have missed so many other moments on the climb if not for the player's guiding hand. It's up to the player how long Ava lingers, how long she focuses on the climb, with all its hidden connections, where she's already part of a whole, rather than the summit, distant and lonely at the top of the world. And it's worth lingering, because Cairn is gorgeous. The art style is a mix of bold comic book outlines and natural splendour that doesn't seem like it should work on paper, but comes together to create something really special. The lines help cracks and handholds stand out from the rest of the mountain without resorting to a single dreaded yellow line, and even then they can be hard to pick out from time to time. When Cairn does want you to take notice of something, it uses bright lights or bold colours, flags flapping in the wind dyed deep reds or blues, or crystals glowing a vibrant green. From a distance though, Kami looks no more abstract than any real mountain. It's only up close that the contours of its cliffs come into focus, a spread of greys and browns and sparkling blacks that freeze into glassy blues and whites the higher you climb. Even most of the mountain vegetation is painted with soft, earthy greens. I don't think it's a mistake that the colour of Ava's clothing is made up of the same blues and reds as the save points located up and down the mountain. The blood-soaked bandages on her hands and feet certainly stick out against the stone of the mountain, as does the bright yellow of her tent. Items are only ever shown to the player through 2D sprites, but they pop in a way few elements of the three-dimensional environment do, drawing the eye with their colours and shapes way more than the corpses or the backpacks or the pots from which they were scavenged. The shift from 3D to 2D almost makes them feel like they're part of another world, further drawing a divide between the mountain's wilderness and the hustle and bustle of the modern era from which Ava is trying to escape, something reinforced by these still images you get at the start and end of the game, showing time spent beyond the context of climbing. Which is not to say the items outshine Kami. The mountain looks amazing. It's a nigh impossible task to handcraft the randomness of the natural world. I can think of only a few games that have ever pulled it off well, but Cairn nailed it. Kami has the feel of a real mountain, slowly slowly shaped across millions of years by the drifting of tectonic plates and the unrelenting erosion of Earth's weather cycle, rather than a pile of climbing challenges tossed randomly together for the sake of gameplay. The scale of the thing is incredible. It just keeps going up no matter how high you seem to climb. A towering god, just like its name would imply. Even the scale of its constituent parts seem immense when you're climbing them. The first guardian, the troglodyte village, the spire. You have the option to pause and pull the camera out at any time to plan your next move, but I often found myself using it just to look over the parts of the mountain I passed by to see what I'd missed. There is so much of Kami to climb, and even though I spent over 18 hours with Cairn, I feel as though I barely saw a sliver of it. Indeed, when you're allowed to retrace your steps at the end of the game, the journey felt surprisingly abrupt. The lighting adds a lot to the experience too. You can watch the hours tick by as the sky turns from orange to blue to grey to violet, and finally to a night of diamonds set into black velvet. Cairn isn't afraid to let things get dark either. There's something very haunting about having to climb by the light of your lantern, or the inky blackness that will swallow you whole if you wander too deep into a random cave. Cairn isn't a horror game by any means, but it does dip its toes into the genre in this cave where Ava's forced to squeeze her way through a narrow passageway and almost gets stuck, a moment that had my heart racing more than any near fall in the open air. Speaking of Ava, she is where Cairn's mix of naturalism and abstraction starts to unravel. One thing that took me by complete surprise was how expressive the character models in Cairn can be. They're able to convey a lot of subtle emotions without having to beat the player over the head through dialogue or music, and I honestly don't know how they did that. If the cutscenes were mocapped or some poor team of artists had to go through and keyframe it by hand. But either way, it punches above its weight. It's one of the best looking games I've played in years, but it doesn't always translate to gameplay. Ava's movements, at least when she's climbing, are determined not by pre-canned animations, but a series of complex equations I'm too much of a humanities guy to understand. And while it's no less impressive than the doubt running across Ava's face before she shuts her eyes to get some sleep from a technical perspective, it does result in a lot more visual jank. Arms and legs sometimes contort at weird angles. Every so often I'd be hurled sideways onto solid ground instead of falling down, and whenever gravity did end up taking Ava for a ride, a moment later she'd always just snap back up to a standing position like nothing had happened. It's the most Cairn ever admits to being a video game, and I found it to be incredibly jarring early on. Cairn is a title that otherwise prioritizes naturalism over video game abstraction, and there's nothing naturalistic about just popping back up like a cartoon character after a fall. I almost wonder if having her stand up or recover after a fall was originally the plan, but Ava's limbs just kept freaking out and clipping through each other, or the jagged terrain made it impossible to do through pre-made animations. The same difficulty in accounting for player progression seems to be the reason why Ava makes most of the climb alone. Marco will walk with you for a while, but the second you hit the rock, you'll be forced to leave him behind. There's another point later on where you can watch him climb a section of the mountain, but he'll only ever go at his own pace. There's no developer-intended way to make the climb together, which is fine, but it does offer a little peek behind the curtain if you ever stop to think about it. What few visual shortcomings Cairn has are more than made up for in the audio design. Climbing has a very tactile quality, the way Ava's hands and feet scrabble across the stone in search of purchase. And there's something very satisfying about the way ropes zip and carabiners clip whenever you stop to off-belay. The quality is carried over to the ice axe as you get toward the top of the mountain. The subtle differences between a good strike, a weak chip, and the hearty whack of a wound-up attack. Ava's little groans and grunts add a lot to the experience too. Sometimes she'll comment on the quality of the move, and the lines are rare enough to avoid becoming repetitive.
I'm gonna slip.
But the whimpering that comes whenever she runs low on stamina, or the sighs of relief whenever you stop to shake the tension out of her limbs, do definitely outstay their welcome. It's still a great performance though, and having shown off the voice acting all through the video, I don't think I need to explain how. Not just Ava, but all the performances. They're a big reason why Cairn's characters come off as real people, even through the stylized designs. And they're always a relief to hear, because otherwise, Cairn is fairly quiet. It doesn't bombard you with music very often, usually only saving it for big story moments like your first real view of Kami. There's a tune that Ava hums from time to time that's got a very soft, melancholy quality to it, a reflection of Ava's search for something she doesn't know how to find. Otherwise, Cairn is content to let the weather fill the silence. Wind howls between the peaks. Thunder cracks the sky open. Rain doesn't just hiss at Ava's back, it trickles through the cracks in the mountain like miniature rivers, and it does so much in bringing Kami to life. The chirping of insects, birdsong, and animal noises make it clear you're never truly alone either, isolated as Ava may seem at times. Cairn looks and sounds great. It's got a very deliberate style that bridges the gap between complete realism and video game abstraction really well, and it's half the reason I always made the effort to thoroughly explore every area of Kami. It's one of those games where if you can see it, you can reach it. If it looks like there might be something to find on some random outcropping, then there probably is, though that does fade the higher you climb. As you approach Kami's summit, the mountain becomes a wasteland of swirling snow and howling wind. The animals know better than to climb so high. The troglodyte settlements slowly shrink in grandeur. The corpses thin out along with the oxygen, and so do the supplies. The excitement and ambition felt at the base has all trickled away, replaced with the cruel fact that Kami is as uncaring as the rest of the world around it. But you're still not alone. Eventually you'll find Marco again, and despite the tensions of their last meeting, he's not one to hold a grudge.
You're alive!
Kind of, yeah.
What are you doing here? I thought... I hoped you'd gone back down. What is this place?
We're in Grandpa's shelter. He brought me here. I was in pretty bad shape.
You should have gone back down.
Couldn't bring myself to do it. Your pep talks are working, apparently.
Marco, I'm sorry.
Lucky for me, Grandpa was watching from afar. And he brought me back here.
Who's Grandpa? Hello?
This is Damas Alfatri, and in many ways he's another toxic reflection of Ava's resistless passions, though in a less murderous way than the Spider. Famous in his day as Ava is in hers, like George Mallory and Andrew Irvine, he climbed into the clouds 12 years before the start of the game and was never seen again, but unlike those two, he didn't die, yet nor was he able to make the summit, so now he acts as its guardian, warning all those who reach him to turn back, for there's nothing to be found on the peaks above but death.
Climbing grades become meaningless above this point. The ice is crumbly no matter what time of the year, and whole sections shear off regularly. Edges are sharp enough to slash ropes and hands. Any hold could fall apart. I've seen 3 outcomes for everyone who attempted to go up. They either end up at the bottom of the gorge, or an ice spike planted through the head, or frozen to death as they stubbornly kept trying.
Damas exists in a strange sort of half-life. He's now too old to ever make the summit, and he knows this, but as long as he remains on Kami, then his attempt hasn't technically failed. It's the reason he stayed for so long. To actually make the descent would be to admit the mountain won, and Damas, like Ava, simply cannot allow that. So he stays, and meets the climbers who come after, and watches as they fall, or freeze, or find themselves impaled on spikes of rock or ice if he can't convince them to turn back. His vigil seems to have mellowed him a bit. You can tell he used to be just as much of a hothead as Ava, if not more so. Quote, "After the Free Devils, only Kami is left. I'll be the first to reach her summit. After that, I can hang my harness. Confident my record won't be broken anytime soon." End quote. And he can still be blunt when he feels like it. At one point you find him trying to shoot down the body of a climber who fell while attempting the ascent so that the corpse can be claimed by the mountain.
Well, how long has he been stuck like this?
13 days. He only died the day before yesterday, though. I've been watching him since he fell. It looked like his shoulder was dislocated, but he suffered in silence.
Why didn't you try to help him?
That's what I'm doing now, kid. Helping. With this. The rifle offers a dignified death to climbers who find themselves in this predicament.
And he offers the shot to Ava, which I took him up on. It's the only time you handle a gun in Cairn, a glimpse into the sort of life Damas led before coming to Kami. But on the whole, he's a chill guy just looking to save lives, aware of the corner he's climbed himself into, yet unable to escape it. The last few entries in his journal read, quote, "Day 157, damn Kami. Day 194, damn Kami. Day 290, damn Kami. Day 419, damned. I'm damned." End quote. Yet there's also something selfish about him. Damas is almost possessive of the mountain now that his one-sided rivalry with Kami has cooled to embers. The dangers he warns people of are very real. Kami's reputation as a killer is well deserved, but that can't erase the years of resentment that must be simmering within him. If he can't have the summit, then no one should. He's kept a record of those who've ignored his advice, and the way he morbidly describes their failures borders on black comedy. Quote, "Assessment. A well-known climber I'd read about in Vertimag. Maybe he could have made it through the mess of ice, but then he took an icy spike right to the chest. Dunzo." End quote. But there's also this entry, quote, "Assessment. A reasonable climber for once. She stayed a few days at the refuge to build up her strength, and even depleted my stock of goat's milk. Then she attempted to climb. Once, twice, 3 times, and then she got it and came back down." End quote. When I first played Cairn, I took this to mean the climber made the summit, and Damas was so stunned at her victory that all he could do was record it quietly in his log. And wouldn't that be the ultimate betrayal for Ava, to learn that not only had someone beaten her to the top of Kami, but that they'd taken the victory in silence, never telling the world of their achievement. But reading it again now, I wonder if what Damas meant was the climber came to her senses and gave up the ascent. It's worded so vaguely vaguely that either option is perfectly valid, and I kind of love that, as much as I love the fact the developers hid the possible revelation of Kami's conquest in an out-of-the-way optional journal. When Ava goes to continue her ascent, he tries one last time to stop her, partly out of concern for her safety, but maybe also because he fears she might be the one to do it, and she calls him out on it.
It's been 12 years, Damus. You can remain here forever in this purgatory you've created for yourself. But let me go. You've had a good run. But it's my turn now.
I won't leave you hanging like a broken mannequin. I will render your corpse to the mountain, as I did with the others.
It's a bittersweet parting, two athletes butting heads at the top of the world, still in it to win it despite all the death they've seen on the ascent. Marco is a lot gentler in his attempts to get Ava to turn back. He sees right through her, and it's here he finally finds the words to express it.
I'm not like you, Marco. The mountain is in my gut, deep inside.
No. I think the mountain is all in your head, like a disease that's eating at you. You can heal if you want to.
And that's true, but Ava simply doesn't know how. Even showing her Damus's shrine to the fallen, a reminder, as Marco says, that Kami always wins in the end, may not be enough to dissuade her, but it does give Ava the option to call Naomi on an old radio, which she does.
Naomi? Naomi, it's me. I just had to... Naomi, Naomi, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Look, I just wanted to tell you that I've been thinking about what you said, you know. About why I'm doing all of this. And I guess I tried to find an answer that you could hear. And I oh fuck! I don't know why. Oh, I wish I knew. I don't. I just don't.
There's a sense of finality to things the next morning, that this is the end of the journey. Marco is ready to go back down now. He expects Ava to join him, and as I exited the cave to see him standing on the bridge leading back to civilization, I found myself torn. I lingered, turning the situation over in my head, the same way Ava must have in-universe. I wandered back up and considered continuing the climb without saying goodbye. It's what Ava would have done, at the game's beginning anyway, but I couldn't do that either. I was trapped, like Damus, unwilling to go back down, but unable to continue. I think it was another risk on the part of the developers to place Cairn's narrative climax ahead of its mechanical one. It felt like a culmination of everything that had come before, every lunge, every fall, every corpse, as though I'd reached the top in spirit, if not in altitude, and that's what makes Cairn incredible. Not that it hardens you against failure like so many other climbing simulators, or accurately recreates the experience of mountaineering, although it does, but that it makes the choice to continue a difficult one. I wanted the summit as much as Ava, but it would mean giving up everything else. She may not be able to articulate why she climbs, but the whole game's been giving her answers as to why she shouldn't. Naomi, Capsule, Marco, Damus, Chris, the Shepherdess, the Spider, Roberto, Gabriel, the father who came to Kami to die on his own terms, and the son reaching out to an abandoned climbbot in mourning. A mountain is more than its summit. Fucking hell, I'm tearing up. A life is more than a goal, and yet, still I wanted both, danger be damned. It's an impossible choice, but Cairn forces you to make it. This is the moment the journey has been leading to. Not the summit, but Ava's decision to continue chasing it. Whatever happens past this point can only be epilogue from a narrative perspective, and after all the game had shown me, I knew it wasn't worth it. It took a little time for me to work up the nerve, but I chose to depart.
I think it's... Yes. I think it's time I came down.
You see snippets of the journey during the credits, their descent of the spire, having to hide from the spider, sharing a cup of tea with the shepherdess, spending the night stargazing on the roof of the abandoned cable car station, and at first it's filled with the same excitement that greeted you when you reached the base of the mountain, but back on solid ground, Ava can't help but look back, surrounded by friends, but consumed by herself. She sits in her room, dissociating, wondering, but what if? It's a question she'll have to carry for the rest of her life. One she'll be no more able to answer than why she chose to climb in the first place. At least with Marco and Naomi in her life, it's not a question she'll have to ponder alone. It's a bittersweet ending, both good and bad, but still unsatisfying. So it's no surprise if you check the achievement stats on Steam, it's by far the path less travelled. Only about a quarter of those who began the ascent made it to the game's end, at least at the time of writing, and of that quarter, only a fifth chose to go home with Marco. The rest continued the climb, drawn ever upward by Kami's allure. I get it. In Ava's situation, it's the choice I'd make too.
I take it I didn't find your cure?
It's not your fault. It's all me. It's just how I am.
Do you think we'll ever meet again?
Yes.
A lie, and an obvious one, but both choose to believe it. Marco promises to wait for Ava in the valley, but after they hug, the confidence cracks, and the desperation slips through.
I suck at goodbyes.
Yeah, I've noticed. Hey! You know how they say never meet your heroes? It's nonsense! You're extraordinary!
It's here that Adamus tries one last time to turn Ava away from the summit, but he fails. And then you take to the wall one last time to reach up and touch eternity. And it's pretty tough, but no more than the last few sections of the mountain. I'd come a long way since the gym at the game's beginning, had finally caught up to Ava's reputed level of skill. All Damus's warnings seem like the blustering of a bitter old man, that maybe he just didn't have what it takes. The summit seemed within Ava's reach, and so did a return journey, safe and sound at Marco's side, and then Kami woke up.
Fuck! Come on!
The avalanche is an endless rush of ice and snow, the closest thing to an action set piece Cairn has. You no longer have the luxury of time. The mountain's coming down around you. The only way to survive is to keep on climbing. Ice spears and sheets of snow come crashing down on Ava's head. It's impossible to see anything through the haze. You can't even rely on the safety net of a piton. Even if you had the time to off-belay, that section of the mountain could fall away at any moment. So I climbed, straight up, as quick as I could. The sky began to clear. I knew from checking every few seconds I was close to the top, close enough to reach a hand over the edge and drag myself to safety on the next tier of the mountain. And then I fell, all the way back down. Only I didn't die. The Edelweiss Roberto had perished searching for proved its legend true. It undid the last few seconds, returned Ava to the wall of the mountain right at the top of the overhang, and this time I made it. Just barely, I made it. Ava collapses, alive but injured. The toll of the ordeal writes itself into her health, hunger, thirst, and temperature gauges, reducing them to a third of their normal length. That is the cost of conquering Kami. The avalanche serves as Cairn's mechanical climax. Ironically, the climb up to the summit is a relatively simple affair. Most of it can be taken on foot, climbing the snowdrifts, sidewinding their way across the mountain's highest peaks. And just as well because Ava's on her last legs. Even if the avalanche hadn't left her injured, there's nothing to find up here. No secret nooks, no supplies to scavenge, not even water sources to crack open and refill your flasks. You're as high as anyone's ever been. The first person to make it past Damas's filter alive. Ava says in an earlier cutscene that she dreams of making the summit only to discover a system of cable cars delivering tourists right to the top of the world. But the truth is far more nightmarish. There's no prize awaiting her here, just more mountain to climb. The final hour of Cairn is spent on the verge of death. When she stops to recover in her tent, she hallucinates that Marco's with her, cooking breakfast just behind her back until she turns around to discover she's still alone. It's a well-documented phenomenon that people in extreme survival situations sometimes hallucinate an unknown, unseen companion, as though if they were only to turn around, they might see another person on the journey with them. Much as I disliked Abominable, one of the things that stuck with me from that book was during the climactic descent, the main protagonist hallucinates a friend of his who perished earlier in the novel to be his climbing partner. Joe Simpson, who almost died falling into a crevasse while climbing the Ciula Grande in 1985, recounts in Touching the Void that he experienced the same thing. That, as he slowly crawled on a shattered leg back to the camp he and two other men had shared before the disaster, he imagined they were walking just behind him, watching him, too polite to rush forward and help. He only fell so far because his climbing partner, Simon Yates, cut the rope securing them together rather than risk being pulled into the crevasse along with Simpson after the initial accident. A moment Cairn spiritually recreates when Climbot, at last, dies on Ava, mere meters from the summit. At first she tries to compel it back into working.
Hey! What are you doing? Hey! Hunk of junk! Turn back on! We're almost there, I can feel it! Oh, please! One last push. Do this for me.
But the rage still within her quickly rises, and she lashes out.
Piece of trash! Get to work! I'm not asking much of you. Do your job! Turn back on! Ah!
She lands the killing blow, renders the thing dead weight, and no amount of begging can coax it back to life.
I didn't mean to do this to you.
She's not talking to Climbot here. It's Naomi and Marco and everyone else she left behind that she's really addressing. But the words will never reach them. You're left with a choice. Cut Climbot loose or carry the weight the rest of the way up the mountain. I found this choice much harder to make than the decision to go back down or continue the ascent. This wasn't just about Climbot. This was about letting go of something more. There's a passage in Adam Higginbotham's Challenger that stuck with me ever since I read the book. At the end, after the years of little mistakes and regulatory oversight snowballed into a disaster that killed 7 people, he writes about the fact the space shuttle's booster rocket exploding did not kill those aboard in the Challenger's crew capsule, that the ensuing inquest found evidence from the capsule's black box that even as it plummeted back to Earth, at least one of the astronauts fought to regain control of the ruptured shuttle. Quote, Dick Scobie was nobody's fool. He knew he was going to die, but he never stopped fighting to live. End quote. I kept thinking back to that as I guided Ava up the tallest of Kami's peaks, for surely she had to know the same thing. After the avalanche, there was no going back, but she never stopped fighting for the mountain's summit, and goddamn did she live. I ultimately chose not to cut Climbot's rope. I couldn't do it. I didn't want her to be alone at the top, and while cutting the rope may have been more in line with Ava's abrasive character, choosing to carry Climbot, I think, holds her back from becoming outwardly unlikable. Giving up everything to chase the summit etches her selfishness into the stone of the mountain, but by carrying Climbot up the last few meters to the peak, Ava keeps a connection, however slight, to the people she's leaving behind, even though they'll never know she made it, even though she'll never get to tell them. I knew Ava was climbing to her death, and so I busted out all the supplies I had left long before Climbot gave in. I downed pills and guzzled water and ate whatever else remained in the bag. Stuff I'd carried all the way up the mountain finally got used. Why not? She couldn't take it with her where she was going. I even downed one of those weird mushrooms I found on a salamander way back down the mountain, because if she was going to die alone on top of the world, she might as well be tripping balls. And by sheer accident, it ended up matching the ending perfectly. There's nothing at the top. No flag, no marker, nothing. Of course there isn't. Just more snow and one hell of a view. It had taken 17 in-game days, and 17 real-life hours, but it was done. We'd won. Now what? There's no way back down, so Ava reaches into the stars and keeps on climbing, slips free the surly bonds of Earth, and touches eternity. I knew it was coming the second Ava was caught by the avalanche, but I should have known where the game was leading her much earlier. Not because of everyone telling her to turn back, or the abandoned Climbbots, the missing persons posters, the dead, the little stories left behind by those who climbed Kami before her. It's human nature to brush those off. Yeah, all those people failed, but I won't. Yet the truth of it was staring me right in the face the whole time, from before I even started the game. Cairn, a pile of rocks to remember the dead, the biggest in the world. As Marco, Naomi, and Chris never learn of what became of Ava, so too do she and the player never learn what becomes of them. It lingers on the stars as the credits play, and the mountain once you return to the main menu, now caught in an ethereal glow. It is not a good ending, but it is the ending Ava wanted. In the preface to the 20th anniversary edition of Mountains of the Mind, Robert McFarlane writes about a letter he received from a reader whose daughter perished while climbing. The letter, McFarlane notes, was more for the father than for him, a catharsis to try and understand what compelled his daughter to climb despite the risks, despite leaving behind young children, despite all the reasons not to. And now I realise, as I sit atop this mountain of rambling asides and bitter introspections, I've just done the same with Cairn. It couldn't give me answers any more than it could Ava, but it did raise the questions with compassion, without judgment. The world's a shitty place to live right now, and the urge to just fade away can be hard to ignore, but Cairn offers a compelling argument against it, even as it understands how impossible that may be. It's something truly special. I can't recommend it enough. And yet, Cairn had one last surprise for me. As I was soaking in the sum total of the experience while the credits played, it threw me a question I wasn't expecting. Quote, "And you, what is your summit?" End quote. I'd felt in conversation with Cairn the whole game. It saw right through me so many times, but it had always couched its questions and counterpoints within its fiction, be they mechanical or narrative in nature. This was the first time it had addressed me directly, artwork to audience. It was quite the question to ask after experiencing both endings. I'd just played a game that was both, at once, an examination of how chasing a dream can lead to self-destruction, and an observation on how giving up that dream can shatter a person. And the answer is, I don't know. I have goals, of course, but I wouldn't call any of them the summit of my ambition. In some ways, I feel I've already reached it. The Trespasser video was one, but there have been others in the past, and there will be more to come. come. Had Ava survived and made the descent to be with Naomi, the same longing for purpose she feels in the ending where she gives up her dream of summiting Kami would have crept back in, as it always does. But Cairn is a sharp reminder that it's sometimes better to find purpose in the journey rather than be consumed by the destination, even while understanding how hard that can be. My grandfather won at life. He immigrated to Australia with next to nothing as a child. As a young man, he was a professional rugby player, a successful businessman in middle age, maybe a bit of a criminal too, I'm not really sure, and still, in his twilight years, regretted never having gone to university. It's just human nature. There will always be higher to climb. The trick, I guess, is knowing when to stop. Thanks for watching. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting me with $5 US a month or more on Patreon. Anonymous, Abril, Azazel, Cass, Hawkwing2652, Heymatey, Heavy, Jeffiet, Jeff Ladd, Kim, Operator Error, Paranoid Android, Reaper2122, Meh, Sminglis, Sarah Bloomer, Smorsky, Sneezy McGlassface, Space Quest Historian, The Official 476, This Sauerkraut, Thomas Angel, Thomas Elliott, Tree3, Angry Bees, Ursa, and Zeke the Phantom. Thank you so much, and thank you again for watching, for sticking around these past 3 years. Here's to another. I'll see you next time.
Right on.